So I'm going to wrap
Mhm.
up, I guess, with a wonderful film. We've come full circle because Justin did Black Panther, and one area of Black Panther that I touched on right at the beginning, but we didn't really explore a lot, was Afrofuturism. So that's a big thing
Mm.
now.
Yes.
In the 60s, not so much, but the point I was making with Black Panther is you had two figures that, in hindsight, I don't think a lot of people, especially in the mainstream in the 60s, would pair these two people together. But to me, it's very natural. Is Sun Ra, born Sonny Blunt, and Jack Kirby, born Jacob Kurtzberg. So you had a Jewish guy in New York who was always just, his imagination was exploding all the time. And finally, by the 60s, he's like, well, why not have a black character? I mean, he had a stereotypical black character in the 40s in one of his war books. And I think he regretted it later, just like Will Eisner did the same thing. He had Ebony White. And then later he's like, oh, I'm embarrassed by that. And so Jack Kirby said, what about a black superhero? And, 1966, there had never been one. There have been black comic book artists, and they were kind of underground because you didn't know what artists looked like back then. Like George Harriman, who did Crazy Cat, the comic strip in the
Oh
early 20th
man.
century was black,
Mhm.
and that's about being black. He's a black cat, and what I'm saying. I mean,
Mhm.
I didn't know this growing up. Not that I grew up with it, but I did grow up reading about comic book history, and at the time I read about it, it was just rumored he was black, but then, by the 80s, it became more publicly known because Fantagraphics started reprinting all the Crazy Cats. So it's fascinating, the stuff that happened through comics, but there was never a black superhero. So Jack Kirby created this character called the Coal Tiger, and he was a black man. He didn't wear a mask, and he had like a tiger print outfit and a cloak and these striped gloves, and he was kind of a red and orange and yellow white ensemble, I guess, evocative of kind of earth colors, and so, of course, as Jack did, I mean, it's good for us because we have the characters, but it was bad for Jack because he got ripped off. He brought to Stan Lee, and Stan Lee's like, well, you're going to need to
Mhm.
redesign this. This isn't going to work. I mean, it looks cool, but. And Stan Lee was, an in-law of Martin Goodman, the publisher, who was notoriously narrow-minded and conservative. I don't think he was affiliated with the mob like DC's publishers were at the time, like Irwin Donenfeld, but he might as well have been. He was just a total capitalist pig. And so Martin Goodman's like, I don't know, Stan. So Stan had to be kind of the go between the people who created the characters and stories and Martin Goodman, who published it as the editor. But unfortunately, Stan didn't know his place. He didn't just stay in that exact role as an editor. If he had, history would have made him the greatest comic book editor ever. Unfortunately, he took credit for creating all the stuff the creators, and now he's regarded as the greatest comic book writer ever, which is slowly being debunked. And any chance I get, I will debunk it. And I'm ready for the hate. Bring it on. Um, but what I was going to say about him is, he went ahead and redesigned him into a character called the Black Panther, and this was just prior to and unrelated to the Black Panther Party forming in Oakland. I think that was 67 or 68. So this was 66. So I guess in a way to get around some of this hubbub, he signed him with a mask that covered his face and his eyes. So you didn't know looking at him that he was black. You just thought it was a character who's his powers and his look are patterned after the animal, the Black Panther. And he, of course, so he lives in the jungle. But Kirby didn't do it just like he lives in the jungle like Tarzan and swings around from the trees. He made it where he's the fucking king. And the people in the jungle are actually the most technological people on Earth. And so Wakanda, I'm glad that it's now become a byword among Black people, of unity and progress. I never thought that would happen. I'm sure Jack Kirby would have had no fucking clue of that ever happening, but he created it, and it is Afrofuturism, and you're taking Black culture and you're elevating Blacks above the status they've had to suffer through colonialism. And not only that, you're bringing in futuristic ideas, like saying, like, basically that the Black people who have been deprived are actually the future of the human race. So they actually will unlock the secrets of the universe and technology. And So a contemporary of Jack Kirby's who did this was Sun Ra, and he was a jazz musician. And from an early age, he began, he was into
Mhm.
Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon, of course, was a huge influence on people like Kenneth Anger, also, and the imagery of that stuff from that era. Yeah, and Jack Kirby. And um, but he decided science fiction was the thing, and he believed he didn't. I don't think he called it Afrofuturism at the time, but he kind of almost kind of created it in a way. Uh, because all his songs had to do with science fiction concepts. But he did a lot of times in his rare vocal songs, he would, put in themes that would basically say, the black race is ascendant, and we're not only ascendant, but we're going to the stars. We're going to get out of this fucking world we've been enslaved in. And so it was pretty profound. So naturally, he was underground. He had a huge group called the Orchestra, and he started playing in the early 50s. And he started dressing as this Sun Ra character, which really became him. I'm not sure if I think he did legally change his name at some point, but Sun Ra really became, he told everyone he was born on Saturn, that he was actually a herald brought to Earth to liberate the black race and bring them out to the stars. And this was done through his music, and his music had all these, albums had all these crazy titles, Interstellar or whatever, and Cosmos. And I'm really actually forgetting the real titles right now on the spot, which is, I have all the albums. But, basically it was, and he did influence, for the record, John Coltrane, because not only did his sax player, John Gilmore, Coltrane went to see John Gilmore in Sun Ra in the 50s, and he lost his head. He was like, good Lord. And John Gilmore was playing way out shit. And Pharoah Sanders began in Sun Ra's band. And that's why he has the Pharoah Sanders persona, like a pharaoh in the name, because he was part of that movement. And he ended up playing with Coltrane, and then after that, one of Coltrane's last recordings was Interstellar Space, and all the songs are named after planets or astrological signs, because he was heavy into astrology. So Coltrane began dabbling in Afrofuturism too, but Sun Ra lived this thing. And so finally, it came about through circuitous means that they were going to make a movie depicting Sun Ra and this lifestyle, but in a fictitious setting. So essentially, Sun Ra plays himself. The film's called Space is the Place. And all the notes I made for when I was going to cover it last time, I can't find. So I'm just going from memory, So correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think it came out in like 72 or 73, maybe 74. If you know otherwise, Chuck, let me know.
I have never heard of this film up till now.
You have never heard of Space is the Place?
No.
Yeah.
I bet you Heather has. You've been to ask her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will. But
do it.
I don't know. Never heard of it. I do like Sun Ra, so.
Oh, you'll love this. So it's basically a blaxploitation movie starring Sun Ra as himself. As in the movie, he literally is from Saturn. So he's playing the persona he created for himself. Though there are callbacks to his real nature. It's very interesting because, he started playing piano in the 40s, and he used his real name, Sonny Blunt. I think it's Herman Blunt, and Sonny was his nickname. So he eventually modified it to Sun, like a sun, S-U-N, comma, Y, Ra. And I think that's what he was originally going to change his name legally to. But anyway, he became Sun Ra. And his band was like the Magic Orchestra or the Astro Magic Orchestra, the Interstellar, whatever. They had a million zillion names, and they were all based on science fiction and or ancient Egyptian mythology. And that was a big thing of his too, ancient Egyptian mythology. And because that was when, black people were the pharaohs, And so he was way ahead of his time. This is the kind of stuff that people started talking about in the mainstream only in my lifetime. So he was doing this before I was ever born, I'm not saying everyone was listening, but he was putting it out there, and he was not apologetic. He walked around in public, and he always dressed in his costumes. They made their own costumes, and he insisted he was from Saturn, and some people thought he was insane, but see, I get it though. It's the kind of mentality that is now happening with, like the trans community, even though I think I think it may be going to a far an extreme, but it's kind of like also the punk rock movement. It's like Richard Hell said, "You create your own heroes." So I made Richard Hell. I'm not Lester Myers. I'm Richard Hell. And that's kind of what punk rock was about, and that's kind of what Sun Ra did even before any of this. He was like, "This is who I want to be. This is my actualization. I identify as a Saturnian. So fuck you. I'm a Saturnian." So and believe me, there wasn't a big community on the internet or any internet to foster and encourage him like is happening with the trans community. He was on his fucking own, but luckily he had all these black musicians that and fans that respected him as a composer and a musician, and that he was for civil rights so heavily. So he did have a following. He wasn't mainstream like Coltrane. He was like a cult jazz guy. I mean, now these days his name is often mentioned in the same breath as Coltrane and people like that, but Miles Davis, but that took decades, and he played for decades. He played until I think he died in the early 90s perhaps. And the orchestra still kept going, and one guy, Marshall Allen, who is pushing 90, who was one of his main horn players, still leads the orchestra. And I saw footage from them for at least the last 5 years, and he's still fucking amazing. And that was with their blessing. Now, back then, bands didn't continue like that, but there have been bands like Embryo, the krautrock group, where they were a commune. And so when Christian Burchard, the founder and drummer, died, he bequeathed the Embryo experience to his daughter, so she still leads Embryo. And a similar thing recently happened with Tangerine Dream, though some people question if that's an ideological thing like Sun Ra or Christian Burchard, or if it's just a money marketing, like we've got the brand Tangerine. There are no original members in Tangerine Dream. So and now of course rock bands have taken it to extreme just for money, like Foreigner. There's no original members in Foreigner anymore.
Well, there's Gong, who I think
they were
David
a commune.
Allen.
Yes.
Yeah, David Allen passed away quite a few years ago, and I think Kavis Tarabi from the Cardiacs is now their leader, and they're kind of going on.
Isn't the French guy who played the sax still playing with them sometimes? Like some of the DDA and some of those guys are still popping up. There's some continuity on the recordings here and there.
Yeah, I was just very surprised that Gong were still out there doing.
Yeah, they're touring now.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I love Gong. Now, he loses me on some of his overly comical material because I don't think his wit is as sharp as Frank Zappa's. But the outer space stuff and the trippy stuff and the jamming, yeah, it's fucking incredible. And of course, Gong and Embryo and Amandul, all these German, they shared members back and forth, But that's a whole nother show, another whole idea when we get into movies about music, which that's coming one day. I don't know when, but in this movie, I would say it's about music, but it's a musical, I guess. But it's really a story. So in the story, in the 1940s, Sonny Blunt is playing piano in the Chicago jazz club, and the owner and the MC are like complaining that he's like terrible. And so the guy who owns the club is like, he's black. He's like, fire this guy. He's no good. He's terrible. And so it's kind of an indignity heaped on Mr. Blunt. So years later, you could say karma came around. So years later, he's Sun Ra, and through his powers, he does recapture the 40s from the present. Like it's like sort of a time travel re-experience reenactment. So it's not just a linear, ordinary like this happens then this. It's kind of like through flashbacks and back and forth. But in the present day, so early 70s, he's got the orchestra. They all play themselves, basically. June Tyson is their singer. During this period, they had more of a fusion influence, though arguably they influenced fusion. Sun Ra was playing organ and like synthesizers, early synthesizers, and he was doing songs with lyrics that were all like cosmic outer space. He wrote the lyrics, and June Tyson was this just really charismatic black woman singer. She was with him for many years. So this is early in their run together with John Gilmore, Marshall Allen, Pat. This is like the classic lineup. And the plot is that Sun Ra is spreading his thing through his music, just being Sun Ra. And he's telling young people uh, who are young black people, where they're messing up, and now, not everything about Sun Ra, it was all about black liberation, but he disagreed with the Black Panthers, for instance. He did not like them. He thought their approach was all wrong. Of course, I disagree, but that's okay. And he felt like he sounded at the time, even though I think he's much more authentic and well intentioned, he sounded kind of like Bill Cosby was in the 80s when he started condescending to rappers, like just being a total prick. Like, you guys are just vulgar and and we see what happened to him. But anyway, karma, baby.
Yeah.
But Sun Ra was kind of like that to these characters in the movie. So at first, these like young hipster black characters and a couple of their Hawaii hippie friends, they're like blowing on, like, this guy's crazy, he's insane. And then he does a few magic things, just offhand, transforms someone's shoes or stuff like that. And they're making fun of how he dresses. And so he tells them he's from outer space, and they're like, from outer space. He's like, well, where are you from? What are you? You're part of this world. He means the society, the USA, the Western world. And he's like, a white man walked on the moon. And they're like, so? And he's like, y'all can't walk on the moon. And they're like, why not? They're like, because you're not real to them. So when you tell me I'm unreal and I'm a fantasy, all of you young black people are a fantasy to them. To them, you are unreal, you are invisible. So, but I have walked on the moon, and I will walk on Saturn, and I will lead you there. And so they start going, hey, this guy's pretty cool. So he gets these like little acolytes, and his prominent one is played by Jack Baker. I don't know if any of you know.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
John Anthony Bailey. Of course, he had a lengthy career. He started out in comedy.
Love Jack Baker.
Yes, this is one of his early movie roles before he did the Kentucky Fried Movie, and before he did. Well, it was around the same time, or maybe a year or two before he did Happy Days, where he played Fonzie's drummer. So he's one of those character actors you knew in the 70s. He had bit parts in other blaxploitation movies. This was really his first feature movie, and of course he practically steals the show. He's got this whole fast talking jive thing down. He's really funny. He's really sharp. And of course, for the audience's benefit, and maybe, I don't know if Briggy knows this or not, but Jack Baker ended up becoming a porn actor and did that until his death from AIDS, unfortunately. And his most well-known movies were with the Dark brothers, or Gregory Dark did some really kind of extreme proto-gonzo porn, but always with a story, amazingly, and pretty good production values. I mean, they're not unwatchable. Yeah. And of course, the most famous ones he did were The Devil and Miss Jones 3 and 4, which are only tangentially related to 1 and 2. And he cast this younger, new wavy actress as Juliet Justine Jones, the same character. And Jack Baker is he's kind of like a magic Negro in this movie. I never thought about that before. He appears to her, and he kind of guides her through, because in the original Devil Miss Jones, she talks to this guy Abacus, who's this white guy. And of course, it's the 70s, it's the occult. So he's wearing a turtleneck shirt and a dress jacket. Like a guy. But now it's Jack Baker. It's like he's on the street, man. And he's like telling her all these maxims about what she's got to do. She's going to be decadent now, and this is what people do in heaven. This is what people do in hell. So we're going to go to hell and have a good time. And he's talking about karma. And I'm not going to go into some of the really hilarious karmic things he says, because I'm sure y'all would enjoy them, but I don't know if everyone in the audience would. I mean, I don't want to take the risk. Ask me off show, like in the comments. But they're funny as hell. They're the first times I saw his work. Well, the second time. First time I saw his work, that I knew I saw him in Happy Days. I didn't know it was the same guy. I saw him in a Kentucky Fried Movie. Didn't know it was the same guy. But I saw him in New Wave Hookers, which is really, to me, an iconic porn movie. Yes. And it's one that will never be screened any longer in its true form, because Tracy Lawrence, who has a liminal role, but they bank on her because she was the penthouse pet that year. She was actually underage when she shot those scenes. I mean, she became of age like right after that. and then did one more porn and then retired from porn permanently. I used to have a copy of the original, and when I moved, I just left behind or gave away all my VHSs, and I really should have kept a few that were extremely rare. That was one because
It's kind of like don't
huh?
need to be committing no crimes.
Yeah, no, and I've seen the revised version, and it's okay. I mean, she's really more of a symbol, which is very powerful. She plays like a devil girl, and she only has one sex scene. She's more of kind of like a, cracking the whip and keeping the action going. But Jack Baker is one of these three guys that decide they're going to start, basically a brothel out of their humble office. And Jamie Gillis is one. I forgot the name of the other actor, and they're all three comedic types. So Jack Baker's, he's like the brains of it. Even though he's like the jive and black guy, he's actually by far the smartest of them. So he's the leader. And then there's Jamie Gillis, who's like the strange guy who thinks he's speaks in a foreign accent, pretends to be foreign. He's got like kind of punk rock clothes and a spike collar. And then there's the blonde guy. They call him a name like an animal, like the dog.
He's a dog.
Yeah, and he's like a brainless just fuck machine, basically. And so they decide they're going to get women to come in and be hookers. And he says the classic lines. They're like, "How are you going to do it?" I can't remember the name of Jack's character in this New Wave Hookers, but like, "How are you going to do it?" And he's like, "Okay, man, we're going to program them through music. You see these girls running around with these headphones. We're going to put the music in there. It's going to throw out those subliminal signals of sexuality and make them hoes." And then they're like, "Well, what kind of music are we going to use?" He's like, "What's popular now, baby? The new wave. It's got to be strictly the new wave. If it's not the new wave, it's not going to work on these women." And that line, "strictly the new wave," still cracks me up. It's got to be strictly the new wave. So
soundtracks got the Plugs among other bands.
Yes, now the Plugs does the music. I mean, it's their album anyway, but they use the Plugs single "Electrify Me" as the opening, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. And I first heard it on this movie, and then I subsequently heard their album. They were like a Hispanic punk band, late 70s, early 80s, and their music being this gives it a lot of cred too. And so I'm going to miss the opening credits because it's their music and Tracy dancing around she's not naked, she's scantily clad in the devil outfit with these cool credits. So they had to kind of, re-edit it. Long story short, his first movie is Space is the Place. So he is kind of the guy who I think is supposed to symbolize the young black youth that Sun Ra is trying to get. And he's kind of wishy-washy. Like, at first he thinks Sun Ra is not for real, like a lot of them do. Then he becomes a total acolyte, like an apostle, like to Sun Ra, And then he starts to doubt Sun Ra. He almost becomes like a Judas figure. But then toward the end, he decides, fuck no, I'm going to save Sun Ra. So what are they saving Sun Ra from? So the villain is this cat named the Overseer. I'm blanking on the actor's name, but he is a smooth talking con man who apparently is like Sun Ra, seemingly immortal. And he's the one who fucked with him in the 1940s. And so they still have this grudge match. And the Overseer basically is all about money and capitalism. He thinks all black people should sell out, play the game, and exploit their own for he's always getting with prostitutes constantly, some white, mostly black. And he's got a sidekick played by the great, funny Christopher Brooks, who played Jesus Christ in the Mac. But he's also in Frederick Hobbs' movies, Roseland and Alabama's Ghost, which Richard covered Alabama's Ghost on this channel. He plays Alabama. But Christopher Brooks is another one of those guys from the 70s. You'd know him if you saw him. He did a lot of TV. Yeah. But the Mac role is hilarious. I mean, he's not really Jesus Christ, but he's a mental patient that Goldie, the Mac, happens upon, and he believes he's Jesus Christ. And Christopher Brooks he's got a great voice. I almost think he should have played the main villain, but he's relegated to being the sidekick to the villain. And he has to kind of keep everything together. And he has mixed feelings about Sun Ra. Like, he's like, boss, we're going to destroy Sun Ra. We're going to discredit him in the black community. We're going to sabotage his concerts. We're going to keep this message from reaching people. But then on the other hand, he gets mad at the boss because the boss keeps promising him these prostitutes. Well, they're not all necessarily prostitutes. I think they're doing it for free. These young slutty women, and the running joke is he constantly stops him. Like, he'll be in a room and he'll have like three girls come in, and he's like, "Now it's the time for the reward." And Christopher Brooks is like, "Yeah, baby," and then he slams the door. And Christopher Brooks is in the hallway fuming. And that's like his little comic thing he comes back to. But he's fantastic. His character's like a total bullshit artist. And I wish I could remember the name of his character because it's very iconic. But it took me a month to get to covering this movie. So we're lucky with what we can remember here. So yeah, they have a Sun Ra and the Overseer meet in the desert again, like magical. And they play a chess game like Death and the Night and Seventh Seal. And, they're basically playing for the fate of really the black race, I would say. The human race, but specifically the black race. And so the Overseer's always trying to trick him, and Sun Ra's always cool. That's the thing about him. Epitome of a jazz musician. It's like, be cool. Don't get ruffled, don't get mad. Only raise your voice when you're really preaching. But other than that, keep it cool, keep it on the down low. And so Sun Ra's band and some of his young now followers, like Jack Baker, they think he's keeping it a little too cool because he's like, he's being really strict about the music and the practicing. And then other times he's being slack about it. And they're like, Sun Ra, are you going to run through this with us? He's like, we will know when the time is right. The stars will align, the cosmics, the sounds will emerge. I'm paraphrasing, but only slightly. And I grew up on science fiction too, so I can paraphrase okay with that. But Sun Ra when I found Sun Ra, it was quite a revelation because the first space music I heard was Hawkwind, and I was immediately in love. I'd been hearing about them since I was a small child because they worked with Michael Moorcock and other sci-fi people. Yeah. And then when I saw Sun Ra, I was like, this shit is next level. And they were doing it before Hawkwind. Yeah. And Hawkwind started doing it in 1968. So, it's really amazing the way I think it comments a lot on the black community being sold a bill of goods, or wolf tickets. Isn't that one phrase that you use a lot to say that, we tricked you, that, they like to characterize certain black characters as white people as trickster characters like Brer Rabbit. But actually, the tricksters are really the white people. They're like setting you up and saying, we're going to give you this. Like, no, not yet. And it comes all the way down to now with people like fucking Hillary Clinton and the incrementalism. Just wait a few more elections and black people will have complete freedom finally, which is not in their plan whatsoever. And so in this era, it's fascinating because it was a black liberation era. And so they really subvert this genre. They subvert two genres, blaxploitation and science fiction. And also make it a musical with free jazz, which there really wasn't any free jazz musical at that time with a storyline. So it's historic. And finally, the music wins the fucking day, man. Sun Ra is able to get the concert together, and June sings the song, and she's like, we travel the spaceways. Space is the place, and you just can't get these songs out of your head. You see the spaceship leaving. Before the spaceship leaves, he does some interesting things to wrap it up. Jack Baker, when he decided he did like Sun Ra and he was going to sacrifice his life, he gets shot to death. Well, Sun Ra raises him. He has this mirror, and Sun Ra sees himself in this mirror, and it's like in Orpheus, a mirror that's into another dimension. You see yourself, and then in Orpheus, they said every time you look in the mirror, you see death because you're seeing yourself aging. And so it's a gate to the underworld. So in this one, it's like a crucible. Like he sends the dead Jack Baker through the mirror and he comes out alive. And he's like, you're redeemed. You're coming with me. Because he's doing like a Marcus Garvey kind of thing. He's taking the spaceship, not the Black Star Liner, but a fucking starship. And this is around the time of Funkadelic doing this. I mean, Funkadelic was Afrofuturist too. This was right in that niche. Sun Ra did it first, but this imagery came out right around the time that they started doing it hardcore too. So you could arguably say who influenced who in this movie. But the start. This was before the Mothership Connection album, I guess is my point. So they're getting them together, and then Christopher Brooks, of course, he's like I said, he's a sellout and a yes man to the villain, and he's like, I want to go with you, Sun Ra. I'm wrong. I've been wrong. And Sun Ra goes, you can't go with me, but you can pass through the mirror. And so he thinks he's passed through the mirror. He's going to go with him like Jack Baker. So he passes through the mirror, and he's like, as you pass through the mirror, I am killing your white side. It is gone forever. Only the black will emerge. So he comes out. He looks the same. But then he stays on Earth. But he goes as an agent of change. He goes to the overseer, and he's like, fuck you. I'm going to get the women. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm the real deal. Sun Ra's the real deal, and you're nothing. And the overseer's basically like this sniveling miscreant at this point because his ego is just imploded. And so Sun Ra takes his people, and they sing "We Travel the Spaceways," and that's what they do. And it's just a beautiful, happy ending for everybody. And it's an incredible movie. I've owned it for years on DVD, but I had not watched it in a long time. And I watched it to prepare to do the show we were going to do like 3 weeks ago. That's when I took all the in-depth notes, because there's some interesting notes about the development of the movie, but that's okay. You guys get the picture. And research it for yourself, people watching. Start with Wikipedia. Space is the place. Go on YouTube, look for the soundtrack album. It is fucking incredible. And there's videos of the movie on YouTube. I think there might even be a print on YouTube. I think it's on Plex too. But I highly recommend it. I think it really it kind of, the message is universal and eternal, as it was meant to be. And he's basically saying, he says it. He's like, we people were, kings. We were enslaved on Earth. Our destiny is the stars. Now, he was saying this 30 years before hip hop artists saying, we were kings once, like Queen Latifah. Same with The Spook Who Sat by the Door, the great scene where Dan Freeman gets with the prostitute, and she's got this really cool headdress and everything. And after she's dressed in this kind of dashiki, and he says, you look like an African queen I saw in a book. And she's like, you fucking with me, man. He's like, no, I mean it. You look exactly like her. Did you know that our women were queens? And so she becomes his informant. She basically has sex with becomes a hooker to the white guys in the FBI, in the CIA, and people he's trying to oppose, to feed him information to destroy them. Great actors too. That actress is Paula Kelly, who was in Soylent Green. She was the black love interest of Charlton Heston in Soylent Green. Not to be confused with Rosalind Cash, the black love interest in Omega Man. Because back then, Charlton Heston wasn't totally fucked up in the head yet. He was actually for civil rights, and he was down with black women.
He was the furniture. She was the furniture.
The furniture, right. I mean,
it was the furniture. And
very politically incorrect, yes.
Correct, but she was the furniture.
But she was the best furniture, whereas, the one, of course, he falls in love with, though, is the white woman, Lee Taylor Young. But I've seen Paula Kelly in other movies. She's like a chameleon, though. She can play anything. I don't know if she's alive or not. But anyway, I'm glad that we've been able to visit these eras and these different kinds of films. This is kind of what I envisioned. And then that will be a nice, not ending, but, a nice denouement to this series. And I'm real happy the way it's come out. I thank you guys. You guys specifically, because you stuck with me through the whole thing. But also, Bill and Justin and Kaylin and was there anyone else who sat in? No, that's everybody. Because Keith didn't make it. But Tim covered Abby and Blade, so we can't forget that, man. So yeah, everybody have a good evening. We're gonna sign off of the recording, and we love you. Does anything you guys would like to say to our audience?
Good night. Thanks for showing up. Show up again.
What about you, Chuck? You know the magic words.
Be good. Oh no.
Not not
subscribe.
Yeah.
Subscribe.
Tip your waitresses Tim's. Yes, like and subscribe.
Subscribe, click that bell
Always.
for notifications, and
Tell your friends.
Tip early, tip often.
Always, bro. Always. All
Bye,
right.
guys.
Good night, everybody. I'm going to sign off. Love.
Sorry.
Hi, you've been watching Deep Images. I'm Henry Covert, your host. This is Bergie Williams and C.F. Roberts, two of our most amazing panelists. And we've been talking about an incredible series here. We do these series sessions every so often. We break them into individual episodes. So we wanted to kind of give you a segue and let you know what you've just watched and what you can look forward to. So just want to remind you, thank you for watching. And please like and subscribe and support the channel any way you can. Do you guys have anything to say?
Yeah, like, subscribe, come back, see us. We don't bite. Type, type, type.
Do you like that? We like that. Let me tell you something. Leave some comments.
Hell yeah.
Leave something in chat. If you like us, talk to us. If you don't like us, talk to us. We want to hear from you.
All right. Y'all have a good evening. Thanks for watching.